I am going to let them introduce themselves, and I'm going to share my screen. All right, Jude.
Welcome, and I would like to also say happy St. Patrick's Day. I am Patricia Hayner. I am a professor here at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. I teach educational administration. When I thought about, well, yesterday when Jude said talk about a little bio, I realized that my career has barely been divided into thirds. The first third I taught math, teacher. The next third was administration. And now this third, which is really the final third, is higher education. But the thing that is kind of similar is that when I signed my first contract, I was the first female math teacher in the school district. And when I signed at UNK, I was also the first full-time female person in the ed department and the first female chair. So I'm happy to say that a lot of decades have passed and that has changed, and now my classes are an equal mix. But another really important thing to me of longevity is that with my presentation today, I get to do it with a good friend and fellow colleague, but also I'm able to present with my 3 grandchildren. Okay. Today's topics will be curriculum compacting, tiered lessons, international baccalaureate tools and resources. I have a really fun activity, excuse me, I have a really fun activity for us to do today. And it is for you to get out a pencil and paper. And for the next 20 minutes, we're gonna write our ABCs. And you're thinking you already know your ABCs. You know, I'm gonna say to you, don't worry about it, because we know that practice is good whether we know it or not. I'm sure that you're thinking that's rather absurd, but that is a common belief. In fact, right now across the country, there are students who are sitting in classrooms as we speak, having to listen to material that they have already covered, which is why differentiation of curriculum is so important. Okay, curriculum compacting is probably one of my very favorite techniques of differentiation. How does it look? Who in your class finishes their homework first? Who finished tests first? Who tests at high levels? But to me, the most important thing is which of your students look bored? No, we don't have quite the right slide up there.
My cat sat on my keyboard. I apologize.
How does it work is the one you're looking for. Okay, good job, Cheyenne. How does it work? We determine the mastery materials, and in fact, I want to say that you can do it however you would feel comfortable, but if in math, to me, it's like you do a pre-test, whether it's over a unit, chapter, whatever, and through that, you're able to see if they have really mastered the material. And if they have high scores, they don't have to sit in the classroom then and listen to the repetition. They are open for adjustments. And there are really 2 schools of thought on that. Some feel like you should do acceleration in the content area, and others feel like they have an enrichment activity that they can follow their own passion. And I want to share with you an example. Many years ago, just leave it there for a minute, okay. Many years ago, a 6th grade teacher came to me and she said, I have a group of students who do everything right. They knock the top out of everything. And they're not a behavior problem, but I'm really worried about them being bored. So we sat down and we went through different types of differentiation, and we decided on compacting. So with this little group, well, with the whole class, she would do a pre-test, and this little group then scored high, and they didn't have to sit in the classroom and hear the repetition. They were able to do one of the adjustments. The thing that was most interesting to me from this is that there was one boy who never had to attend class. He only went into the classroom to take the pre-test, and then he was free to do acceleration. We were concerned. I mean, we had lots of talks about, like, how do you think he will do at the end of the year? You know, how the parents would feel and whatever and all. And I'm really happy to say that he still got a 98 on his standardized test without ever being in the classroom. But more importantly, he was never bored. And to me, that's really key. Okay, next one. How to implement. I keep really putting pressure on teachers, and with teaching administrators, I'm putting pressure on them to help their teachers be able to do some of these things. If you don't understand your content really well, you're not going to be able to ever differentiate, and you have to have knowledge. You have to have a plethora of challenging options for your students. And I harp on this all the time, because I think the most important thing with working with gifted students is to care about them. I think that everyone cares about their students, but there are just too many teachers who may feel threatened by gifted kids. And I think that we all can say that wherever we taught classes, there were always people sitting in the room who were smarter than you are, and you have to accept that. And instead of feeling threatened by it, nurture it. I think I'm the storyteller in this webinar, so I want to tell you one story about an enrichment summer program. And it was back in the 80s, and I know most of you are saying I wasn't even born yet, but back in the 80s, my superintendent came to me and he said, would you create a gifted program for the district? The thing that was sad to me was this request did not come from the teachers, but it came from the parents. I said to him that, I mean, I was really excited. And I said, I will be happy to do it, but I have one request, and that is I get to select the teachers at the 4 elementaries with whom I'm going to collaborate and develop programs. Well, to bring this kind of to closure, the program was really successful, and even today it is still in place, which is good to know. But the program went well, and then a couple of years later we did a summer school, and the summer school grew also. We started with just our own students, like in one building, and then it grew, and then finally we included people statewide, because we had administrators who felt like they could take care of their option of caring for their gifted students if they sent them to our summer school. And then all of a sudden we were getting students who were coming from Kansas and Colorado. So it really grew. But the fun fact I wanted to share with you today is that one of our students who attended our Gifted Summer School program is our Commissioner of Education, Dr. Matt Bloomstead. So he attended our program and knows it quite well. Now I'm going to pass the baton to my good friend who meets all students' learning needs, Jude.
Thank you, Dr. Hayner. I'm Jude Macho-Sapero. I'm the Director of Gifted Education at the University of Nebraska-Kearney, and I'm going to talk a little bit about tiering. So there are multiple ways to use tiering, and that includes interests, learning styles, ability levels, you name it, you can tier just about anything. But we also need to look at our standards first to begin the tiering process. And a little bit later on, Nicole is going to talk to you about that. The goal of tiering is to provide meaningful instruction at the student's level and their ability, and even at their interest level. Gifted learners, they need something different. They are not going to be the learners who are going to necessarily fit all of the check boxes. You may have some gifted learners who are interested in some things or are stronger in some things and struggle with other things. We know that handing out additional work is a form of punishment for gifted kids, but so often that happens, and we need to stop that. Tiering is really an easy way for teachers to consider ahead of time how to keep those gifted learners interested and involved in their learning process so they can really, really excel. One thing I would suggest very strongly is to not give these the gifted children the job of teaching other students. Let's face it, they just don't have the credentials. Cheyenne, can you go to the next one? Okay, so there are 3 tiers, and what we're really looking at is Tomlinson's tiering method. So the first tier, you're going to reach those are your kids. Those are 80 to 90% of your kids, and you're going to reach most of the students in your class when you tier for the first level. The second level, you need to differentiate. That's a smaller percentage of your students. Now, if you're in special education, you may tier differently. In gifted education, what you're going to do is take the core, tier 1, and you're going to give them more latitude, more ability to investigate, to research, to do some independent work, and you're going to have to encourage that. At tier 3, it's the core, tier 1, so it's the same information, the same topics that you're teaching tier 1, but you're giving this very small percentage of students even more latitude and more opportunity to research and investigate and just really dig into stuff that it really interests them. You're giving them more latitude to do that in tier 3, so they could really just roll up their sleeves and get into something. The interesting thing about tiering is with your twice exceptional learners, those individuals may wind up tier 3 in, just for an example, possibly math, but they may be tier 1 or 2 in reading. So just because an individual is tier 3 doesn't make them tier 3 across the board. We have to look at the individual, and this is really individualizing lessons for all learners, but in particular, those gifted learners who need to have the opportunity to really investigate and develop new skills and really flex those muscles. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what do the experts say? Well, I mentioned Tomlinson, and she has all different levels of tiering. Product are culminating assignments that ask the student to research and apply and extend what they have learned from whatever the topic happens to be. Process are the activities that the student engages in order to make sense of what the content is and to master it. And then the content is what the student needs to learn and how the student will access that information. And then the learning environment is the way that the classroom works and feels to that individual learner. Now, some people, when they look at the learning environment, they're thinking, oh, that's UDL. Well, to paraphrase what Tomlinson says, UDL is the physical environment. Tiering is the intellectual environment. It's what you're doing to make the lesson, the materials, what you're trying to share with those learners, stimulating and interesting so that they can really excel and really just dig their teeth into the learning material and just hit the moon with it. Next slide, please. What it isn't. Okay, tiering isn't whole class instruction. Now, tier 1 is for a large percentage of your learners, but you're not going to have everyone in tier 1. Your gifted students may not be your best behaved students. If they're stuck in tier 1, they're going to need to go beyond that. So you want them to have more access. Just because we provide different materials, that doesn't mean they're not learning. Everyone has the right to learn differently if they need to in order to access the information. So tiering allows us to do that. You can divide them into small groups. One of the things I like to do when I was tiering with my students was allow them to have input into what they were learning. And they came up with some really, really brilliant ideas. We would connect with the other instructors in the different subject areas and try to make the whole thing fit together for them. For example, the science teacher decided that he wanted to do this space-related activity with them. So we went to the science center and they let us use the science center, and our kids went off into a space station, which was this huge tent that we built for them. And they had computers there. And as they would, and there were adults with them because they spent the night there. NASA donated jumpsuits for them, and they got to do all kinds of cool stuff like that. Before they took off to their spacecraft, we had a big dinner the night before, and then we ate with them, and they marched off, and we got to crawl into the space station with them and hang out for them for a little bit. And then what they would do is, because they had their computers, they were able to come into the classroom. So I taught history at that point. They were able to come into the classroom, and I was doing history as it related to the space race and things like that, while they were in space at the Science Center doing other activities related to science. And it was just a really nice way for those learners to have a unique opportunity and to get a unique learning experience, and then relay that information to us from their space station at the Science Center to the other learners. And it was just a fun, enriching, terrific experience. And I could tell you it's been a while, but those students still remember it. And now I am going to have Kelsey talk more about tiering.
Thank you, Dr. Sapero. So my name is Kelsey Hayner, and I'm a 7th grade special education teacher. I graduated from University of Nebraska at Kearney with my degree in mild and moderate disabilities, and then I returned to UNK to get my master's in educational administration. And so as a special ed teacher, I am going to be talking to you about tiering lessons for students that are twice exceptional. And they really do make up a very small percent of your student population, but they can present as quite a challenge if you're not prepared to treat them as a student that receives special ed services, and then also a student that needs access to enhanced curriculum. And so my passion for this topic really stemmed from 2 boys that I had on my caseload one of my first years teaching, and they were also in our HAL program, the High Ability Learners. And so our HAL program really consisted of field trips in those students' areas of interest, which is an awesome experience for those students, but it didn't really extend into the classroom. And so these 2 boys were constantly challenging their classroom teachers and questioning certain assignments, and then refusing to do work that they felt was unnecessary. And so as their case manager, I used behavior intervention plans, different types of motivators, but we really didn't start to see improvement until we adjusted our approach to teaching them and tiering our lessons appropriately. So I'm going to be giving you a couple examples of ways for you to help students like those 2 boys. Next, please. So just to give you an idea of the tier 1, the core, this is a lesson from a language arts class, and students are assigned a text and then expected to make 9 total connections. So 3 text to self, 3 text to text, and 3 text to world connections that they have to annotate and then highlight within the text. Next, please. So our first student A, he is identified as a student with autism, and his main interests are math and science, but he's also advanced in reading comprehension, and he loves arts and loves technology as well. One of his focus areas is the oppositional behavior when presented with a non-preferred task. So writing is definitely a non-preferred task for him. Next, please. So the way to give this student core plus more is to start with assigning the advanced level text and then simply asking him to draw his connections instead of writing them. And so he's still just doing the 9 connections like the rest of the class, but then he also has to figure out the best way to visually represent the connections he made. So asking him to draw really encourages that abstract thinking. It makes a non-preferred task a lot more enjoyable for him. And then we also know that creativity promotes innovation in the future. So then the next the next part of his lesson, go back please, thank you, is to give him a choice. Giving students choices is a great strategy for any students that are showing oppositional behaviors. And so his choices, does he want to write why he chose these pictures or drew them, or verbally explain it to a teacher? And knowing him, he's going to want to verbally explain it. And so that's a great way to embed those speech skills and work on different skills like eye contact, tone, and body language as well. Next, please. Okay, looking at student B, he's identified as a student with an emotional disability, and he is academically higher than our student A. He's advanced in all subject areas and then really loves reading. One of his focus areas is having being withdrawn when he perceives a task as too long or just boring in his opinion. Okay, so he would also be given the advanced level text and then given this online worksheet that I have on the presentation here. And so the first thing he would notice is that it appears shorter than the other assignments. So instead of finding the 9 connections, he has 7 questions on this online worksheet. But the questions are definitely more in depth to help us do that core plus more plus more. And so if you look at questions number 4 and 6, you can see that they're links, one to an article and one to a video. And so then I'm able there to embed more content into his assignment and give him access to more information than just the text that he is reading. And then you can also, as a teacher, decide if you want to make those links match your students' interests to increase engagement. That's an option as well that you can use. And then for questions 2 and 7, just like with our student A, he's being asked to draw instead of write to encourage that abstract thinking. Next slide, please. So I was just going to end my portion of this presentation with just a couple more ideas for you to easily challenge your students within the class. One of those is ability grouping. I know that some teachers are against that, but in our class, we use a mix of mixed ability and ability grouping. And that ability grouping really allows students to challenge each other and have in-depth conversations. So it's definitely beneficial. And then also just accepting a variety of products can be helpful. Videos, drawing, acting, writing, whatever it might be. And then of course, utilizing technology. I gave you 2 examples. The one from student A, the website is called autodraw.com. I highly recommend that if you have not tried it yet. It is an awesome free online resource. And really, if you're struggling to get started with tiering, I highly recommend collaborating with others. So this could be with just your gifted program coordinator, if your school has one, or if they're a twice exceptional student, their case manager can be a great resource. And then also other teachers and professionals that are in the area of that student's interests. I am a strong believer that 2 minds are better than 1 when it comes to helping our kids. And so I'm going to pass this over to Dylan Girdle to talk about international baccalaureate programs.
All right, thank you, Kelsey. Yeah, my name is Dylan Girdle. I took a little bit different approach to getting into education. I graduated from UNK with my degree in construction management and then decided that that wasn't for me. So went back to UNK and got my teaching certificate and then a couple masters through UNK. And so today I will talk about IB, the International Baccalaureate Program. I'm the STS teacher at Millard North Middle School in Omaha, Nebraska. There's 3 different programs, and I'll talk about the middle years program. It's for students that are ages 11 to 16, and kind of what that does. There's going to be a lot to it. So, I mean, I got a whole packet of stuff they give you when you get to the IB program. So I'm going to try to give you a brief overview of what IB is. And so it's a framework of learning that encourages students to become creative, critical, and reflective thinkers. The aim of it is to foster the development of skills in communication, intercultural understanding, and global engagement. All of these being essential qualities for young people who are to become global leaders. And to that, a few famous IB graduates were Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, King William Alexander of the Netherlands, and no program can be perfect. So one of the others is Kim Jong-un from North Korea. So one of the IB graduates there. In the middle years program, we address holistically students' intellectual and social Go back there, Cheyenne. There you go. Their social, emotional, and physical well-being, provide students the opportunities to develop knowledge and attitudes and skills that they'll need to in order to manage complexity and take actions for their future. So that's one of the things that we in our IB schools talk about extensively, is thinking ahead, thinking of what your actions today are going to affect for tomorrow. So next slide, please, Cheyenne. The design cycle. The IB design cycle for the middle years program, we believe that every student may approach a problem differently depending on their specializations. But we say that it's a link between innovation and creativity, taking thoughts and exploring the possibilities and constraints associated. The middle years is design challenges all students to apply practical and creative thinking skills to solve problems and help raise awareness of their responsibilities with making decision-making and taking actions. And you can see there on the design cycle, it's broke down into inquiring and analyzing, developing ideas, creating the solution, and evaluating. And again, evaluating, and I'll talk a little bit more about reflecting later on. Those are two large key aspects of IB programs. We really want the kids to evaluate what and why they're doing, and then reflect on that. And a lot of the times in those reflections, you can really see kind of the gears turning in the kids' heads of, you know, if I'm in my class, skill and technical sciences, at the end of a project, why did this work this way? Why did it work this way? What would I do different? And that's a big question I always ask my kids, and I know all the other teachers as well. Did it turn out like you wanted it? Did it not turn out like you wanted it? And why? That why question, and a lot of times those kids will, from that question, discover quite a bit more than even what I may or may not have instructed. Okay, next slide, Cheyenne. And so within the IB programs, you have learner profiles. For the middle year programs, we have 10 profiles that, as you can read there, that are attributes that in combination with others will help the kids become responsible members of local, national, and global communities. And that's a big portion of the IB program. IB World Schools, you talk a lot about what you do in your community and how that affects the outside community, whether it's local or national or global, to the point that, like in our school at North, we have all the teams and all the different classes are broke down into, it could be Team Antarctica, Team Sweden, and then grade levels broke down by that way. So they have maps and different kinds of things. So the kids see the world, sometimes just visualizing it and seeing different things. Some of the next profiles, if you want to click to the next one, Cheyenne. So here are the 10 learner profiles. You can see inquirers, knowledgeable, thinkers, communicators, principled, caring, risk takers, balanced, reflective, and open-minded. A few of the key ones that we really hit on: inquirers, that first one, when we try to develop curiosity in the students and develop skills for inquire and research and learn with enthusiasm and sustain our love of learning. That's a big thing that we always talk about, the love of learning and the enthusiasm. If you can get the kids enthused about a certain thing, and sometimes they don't even like that subject, but if you can do something to spark that interest and develop that love of learning, that goes a long way. And reflective, we really consider the world and our own ideas and experiences to be very important. We work to understand our strengths and weaknesses in order to support our learning and our own personal development. And again, reflection, that's a huge thing in the IB schools and the IB world, that kids reflect on what they've done to kind of change what they'll do in the future. Okay, next slide. One of the things that we talk about, interdisciplinary learning, and teaching and learning that is grounded in individual subject groups and disciplines, that extends into other ways that we integrate, bring things together, concepts, methods, or modes of communication from 2 or more subject groups. And when we kind of break those down, we really talk about, as far as integrative, bringing things together, and purposeful, connecting disciplines to solve real world problems, create products or address complex issues that with a single method might not, or a single approach would not have been as likely. An example could be, the relationship between athletic performance and technological innovation. And that's one that at our school, our PE and health classes do. Interactive multimedia products to communicate literary concepts of language, literature class. In my own classroom, I kind of talk with our computers teacher. One thing that we do is rockets and aerodynamics and things like that. And so the kids will do 3D printing in one class. They'll learn the software and they'll learn different aspects of 3D printing. We'll take those skills they've learned, they'll come to my class. We'll talk about rockets, or we'll talk about whatever we're talking about. And then the kids will actually 3D print, for example, rockets. We'll talk about launch lugs and how things work. And then they'll actually, in my class, will 3D print things. Next, please. So again, we're responsible for engaging students in at least one planned unit each year. So 2 different subjects will plan 1 unit per year. Next one. Another thing too that we talk about, approaches to learning, or ATL, and those are posted throughout the hallways. We, through our IB ATL, students develop skills that have relevance across their curriculum that help them learn how to grow. The skills can be learned or taught and improved with practice, developed incrementally as we go through our middle years program. And they'll from 6th grade up to 8th grade at our building, 6 through 8. And you can kind of see those steps as they're going. The skills, we believe, provide a solid foundation for learning independently with others and help students prepare for and demonstrating learning through meaningful assessments. One of the biggest things that I think, being in an IB school now, is they provide a common language that students and teachers can use to not only reflect on the kids and the teachers articulate different aspects, processes of learning. And we refer to this as the tools of learning. This assists the kids in learning to learn. And it's as they learn to learn, and we say that a lot in IB schools, it's fun to watch the kids from 6th to 8th grade as they develop those skills. And then I think that was my last slide. I do want to close with one thing before I turn it over to Nicole. Just a few reasons why the IB middle year program is, in my opinion, a very good program of what we do. Become a lifelong learner. These are the things that we talk about to the kids and parents when they're trying to decide if they want to enroll or come into an IB program. Become a lifelong learner. We always talk about that. Learn how to learn using communication, self-management, collaboration, critical thinking skills. We learn by doing and experiencing through the community projects that we do with different classes. Learn how to connect with what you're doing in the classroom with the real world. We encourage critical thinking, and that's something that we talk about all the time with the kids. It teaches you to analyze and evaluate issues in a way that you might not do in another school. Generate novel ideas and consider new perspectives, especially at the middle school level. It's tough to try to get a middle schooler to consider a new perspective if they're kind of set in their ways, but to develop those ways of getting them to do that. Learn for understanding, not just memorizing things and topics or preparing for facts or exams. Training yourself to organize. Our kids are, by the time they're ending 8th grade, very organized and able to plan their stuff. They're able to meet deadlines. Concentration is pretty good with them. And thinking positively. That's one thing, especially at the middle school level, that sometimes we have issues with. Kids can get down on themselves pretty easily, but they're very well at bouncing back and staying positive. And I always tell my kids, the sun's always going to come up tomorrow. Don't worry about your grades. Come in and give me your best that you have, and we'll go from there. Subjects that we're not taught in isolation. You're encouraged to make connections between subjects, and we really kind of hammer down on that, whether it's IT or computers class, health and PE, empowering you to develop your talents, feeling empowered to prove what you know and earn, what you need. Preparing for future education, preparing yourself for the IB diploma, which you'll get at the end of your diploma program. That's the one right after our middle level. And then finally, just encouraging international mindedness. And again, we talk about that all the time with the kids, whether it's in homeroom or we try to find spots in various classes and at appropriate times to help you critically appreciate your own culture and personal history, as well as the values and traditions of others. And through that whole program, I feel like it makes for a child that's ready to go on and take on the world. So with that, I will hand it off to Nicole to talk about tools and resources.
Thank you, Dylan. My name is Nicole Teaton, and I am in my first year of teaching science at Nebraska City. I earned my bachelor's in elementary education and early childhood 7 years ago from UNK. And then I also got my master's from UNK about 2 years ago. UNK has been very good to us and our family. So we just want to give them a little shout out. I had Dr. Sapero in my undergrad as a professor, and then Dr. Hayner in my graduate program. So we've been really appreciative for the experiences through UNK. And I just wanted to give that little plug. Today, I'm going to try to wrap everything together by talking about tools and resources that will help you with tiering your lesson plans. So we talked about curriculum compacting, how to tier a lesson, and then Dylan talked about with International Baccalaureate, some of those skills that gifted students really thrive in. So the main focus of my tools and resources part of the presentation is the achievement level descriptors that are actually provided through the Nebraska Department of Education. And so they align with our standards. So they make tiering very easy. I'd like to show you just the layout of what they look like. So Cheyenne, could you please click on the achievement level descriptors? And then if you scroll down to grade 6, a little bit up, it should, one more up. No, one more up, sorry. That box right there. I teach 6th grade science, and I taught 6th grade English before this, so that's what I'll be focusing on. If you go to the second page there, now I know it's zoomed out, but I will give you guys an example later. So this is just to show you what it looks like. We have the Nebraska State Standard on the left, and then what the achievement level descriptors do is they describe what a developing, on-track, and college and career ready student are able to grasp within that standard. So 99% of the time, what I've noticed is that the standard and the language in the on-track indicator are almost exactly the same. So we would consider the on-track indicator your 80 to 90% of students, your tier 1, the core, that's what you want them to be able to understand. The developing indicator is a little more simplified version of that standard. And then the college and career ready is for your gifted students and takes that core knowledge just a little step farther. So could you go back to the slide, please? In addition to the achievement level descriptors, I also use the MAP learning continuum to get more specific with content, and I'll show you an example of that next. You can just go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So I'm going to share an example with you from when I taught English at Millard Public Schools. So one of our units was literature circles. And what I did my first year with literature circles was differentiated through ability. I had a developing group, an on-track group, and a college and career ready group. What I noticed was when I compared MAP scores from the fall to spring, from the winter to the spring, all of my students that had read that literature book, that had been part of that literature circle with the college and career ready indicator went up on the MAP. So I had kids that were scoring in the 230s, and if they were in that high literature circle group, they went up even further on the MAP, which I thought was really cool. And so I shared that with my principal, and she said, let's do that as a grade level. So we did, the next year we did that as a grade level. And our gifted kids, those kids in the high ability group, they read the novel Watership Down. and I'll go more into that later. This is an example like what Jude was talking about earlier with differentiating by content. You can see for the achievement level descriptor for this standard, it's about figurative language and literary devices. And you want 80 to 90% of your kids, your tier 1 kids, to be able to identify and explain why authors are using these literary devices. And then it lists all of the literary devices there. Your developing kiddos, you just want them to be able to identify those literary devices. And if you compare the developing to the on track, there's more literary devices in the on track standard or indicator. When you take a look at your college and career ready indicator, you have the same exact literary devices as the on track. So what stuck out to me, the difference between those two, was the word complex in the college and career ready indicator. So what I wanted to do is find an example of a complex literary device, because to me, right now they look the same. So to find a complex literary device, I went to the MAP learning continuum. Cheyenne, could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So if you are familiar with MAP, there is a report called the learning continuum, and it groups your concepts and skills by standard, and you can also group them by concept. What I did is I went into the concepts and I looked at the higher ranges of MAP scores, of RIT scores. So Cheyenne, could you go to the next one, please? I went to literary text, characteristics of text, and I looked at figurative language. And you can see there's a whole list of different types of literary devices there. I wanted to pick one and just do a good job with one complex literary device. So I picked extended metaphor. And you can see that's in the 230 to 240 range. It's also in the 241 to 250 range. And so I added that to my list of literary devices. All right, could you go to the next slide, Cheyenne? So this connects to what Dr. Hayner was talking about. When we curriculum compact, we give a pretest of the material before we start the unit. So what I had done is I had created I and then the other 6th grade teachers, we created a pretest of these literary devices and having students match or explain the literary device. And so my group, the kids that were in my group, they could tell me what all these different types of literary devices were. We focused mainly on 3 of them. We just focused on the extended metaphor, imagery, and mood. And so the book that I chose to go, or the book that I chose for a literature circle, is Watership Down. And it seems like kind of a boring book about rabbits. These rabbits are kicked out of their home, kicked out of their warren, and they need to find a new place to live. They need to find a new warren. And so they stumble upon 2 different warrens that are governed very differently. And the book explores the effect of that government type on the rabbits and how it affects their way of life, how it affects their thinking, how it changes their ability to survive. And so as we were reading the book, I asked them to make connections to real life. Do you see that with government types in our society? And they were really intrigued by that and really anxious to find those connections. And so it was taking it from this simple story about rabbits to, oh my gosh, this is applicable to our real world. So they really connected with that and were engaged with it. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I also have a science example to give you, because the science achievement level descriptors are a little bit different from the ELA and math ones. The science achievement level descriptors, they are based on skills that kids practice in science. So I think there's 8 altogether, but they include things like building a model or asking questions or developing an argument. And what the achievement level descriptors do is they adjust what that means for a developing student with that skill and on-track student with that skill and a college and career ready student with that skill. So I picked the skill of developing a model. We finished our water cycle unit, and the culminating project was that they had to build a model of the water cycle and demonstrate 2 of its processes. So my on-track kids, my tier 1, I wanted them to be able to develop a model to describe 2 processes in the water cycle. So they were given heat lamps, they were given ice cubes, plastic cups, plastic wrap, aluminum foil. And with those materials, then they had to create condensation, evaporation, or runoff or precipitation. And they were, number one, they were thrilled to do it. But it was really fun to see them get creative. My developing kids, they couldn't visualize that. They didn't know what that looked like with the materials in front of them. And so I provided them a model of what they should build and then had them label the different parts so they understood this is what is demonstrating condensation, this is what is demonstrating evaporation. And then they got to work building their water cycle model. My college and career ready kids, I'm going to be honest, I was only with this project, I was trying to differentiate for my developing kids. And I just figured that my college and career ready kids would have really good models. And they just naturally, once they got into their groups, started conversations about, well, I think your idea is really good, but I also think that a model that works like this would demonstrate this better. Let me show you. And so there were groups that came up with multiple models, and they used the heat lamps and the ice to figure out which one best modeled that. And so it was really fun to see them get creative with it because they totally did it without any prompting. They just wanted to explore, which I think is also in relating to what Dylan was saying with constantly asking our kids, how did that go for you? Could it have been better? Would there have been a different outcome? And they just naturally did it. So that was exciting. You can go to the next slide. These are just pictures from that water cycle activity. My developing kiddos, that was the model that I gave them. And then my on-track students, they were able to build a model of the water cycle using the resources I gave them. And then the last picture is of some students brainstorming different ways to create the water cycle. So you can go to the next one. Okay, so what I did is I linked all of the achievement level descriptors here. I don't think we need to click on all of them because I showed you the ELA. Could you click on the math one though, Cheyenne, please? And yeah, whatever grade is fine. They look a lot like the ELA achievement level descriptors. You've got your developing, on track, and college and career ready indicators. They, from what I can tell with the math ones, it seems to be like it's more content, whereas with the science ones, it's really a focus on differentiating the process. But the same thing with English, the English achievement level descriptors, they're also differentiated by content. Could you go back to the other slide? And then I couldn't find any for social studies. And so the ones that I did find were the English language descriptors. Could you click on those real quick? The EL. And these are harder to find. It's in that blocky thing towards the bottom. I think it's the second from the bottom. There you go. Yeah, and any of them works. Thanks. So these English language achievement level descriptors, they focus on reading and writing and how a developing, on track, and then, well, I think they kind of don't call it developing, on track, and CCR, but it shows the progression of becoming a better reader, becoming a better writer. So I thought maybe social studies and other subject areas could use those as a resource, but they're all available. All you have to Google is achievement level descriptors, Nebraska, and your subject. So they've been those have been extremely helpful to me when I'm planning when I'm tiering or differentiating. Okay, you can go back to the slides. And then of course, I have the MAP learning continuum linked there, but if your school uses MAP, then you're familiar with that. That is all of our presentation. So we would love to answer any questions you have. I know we gave you a ton of information, but we just are really appreciative that we could present today. Thank you, Cheyenne, for having us, and we'd love to answer any questions you have.
While we are waiting on questions, I am going to go ahead to the next slide, and I'm also going to paste this into the chat. We do have a survey for you guys to fill out for this. So if you're watching this live now, or if you're watching the recording, you can go to this link and fill out the survey for this session. That would be really helpful. And I will be dropping these slides in really quick so you guys have the links, but we are going to keep it open for questions if you guys have anything to ask our speakers.
I have a question about compacting and tiering for classroom teachers. As a HAL facilitator, I have trouble getting them to do this in their classrooms. I know it's really difficult. They're overwhelmed with everything, of course, so I understand that. But I noticed that with my HAL elementary students, in the younger grades, pre-testing works pretty well because you can see what they know already. A lot of those younger kids, they've learned that stuff at home. They could pre-test out of stuff and move on to other things. But as they get into 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, it's all new material. But the HAL kids move through it so much faster. So we have found that pre-testing is kind of a waste of time for them because when they pre-test, they don't know it because it's brand new information. But when they sit down and finally start learning that in the class, they move so much faster than the rest of the kids in the class that we don't have that kind of, I don't know what I'm trying to say, just that they're not ready to compact because they don't know the information already. So they're not ready to compact or tier because the pre-testing isn't giving them the information that they need. Does that make sense? So I need advice to give to classroom teachers to help them compact or tier when they're not pre-testing. Does that make sense?
You want?
Dr. Hayner, do you want to take that first? Or do you want me
I
to?
will. I'm kind of surprised because the age range that we did do compacting in was the 5th and 6th grade building, and it worked extremely well. But with what you're talking about, talk about storytelling, is like way back when I had 8th grade math, I had a teacher who knew that he had a group that could move ahead, and he simply accelerated within the classroom. And then when we finished 8th grade math in like a matter of weeks, then he went ahead and took us into algebra. And that's 100 years ago. But there are always ways that you can address it, I think. And I think that acceleration works as well as compacting. The bottom line is just so that they don't be bored and we stifle everything until they want to drop out almost.
Right.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Tiering, I'd like to talk about tiering for a second. Or Nicole, did you want to talk, say something?
You go ahead first, that's fine.
Okay. When I first started tiering, I was a history teacher in a middle school, and we had a very large, gifted and talented population in this particular middle school. And one of the things our principal required, it was a small school, but one of the things the principal required is for us to tier. And at first I was like, what is this? And why am I doing this? And I think what she said way back then still makes sense to me, which is tiering is almost like an insurance policy. You're preparing for the what if. You may not use it with this group of kids, but it doesn't mean you can't keep that card in your pocket and pull it out another time. So it's almost like, I don't know, it was kind of fun in a way because I got to create activities and develop things. And sometimes they used them and sometimes they didn't. Another thing I did was would sit with my students and say, okay, so, you finished your work. So this is what I've come up with. Now, I am not gifted. I can tell you that straight up front. I am not gifted, but my students, they were. And I would say to them, what do you think is interesting? How could I make this better? And what they came up with was way better than some of the stuff I came up with, or they took some of what I came up with and built upon it. And it just made it a very collaborative thing. And when you think about it, not only was I getting to teach them history, but I was teaching them how to work collaboratively with other people. And I was also giving them the opportunity to work collaboratively with someone who was much older than them, because in life, they're going to go on and they're going to have people who supervise them who may be older than them. And this gave them that opportunity to build that rapport and that relationship and language to help them be successful. So that's my 2 cents. Nicole, you jump in now, please.
I would just say, like, it seems like this huge responsibility to like tier a unit. But in reality, like my water cycle tiering, that was the summative project that I tiered. I didn't tier the whole unit. I just tiered their summative project. And so if teachers could find just something within that unit to tier, once they know, oh yeah, they caught on to that pretty quick, let's ask them to build something with that. Or just find a way to differentiate a part of the unit. Like, don't feel all this pressure to have the whole thing at a higher level, but just parts of it to keep them engaged.
Nicole is right, baby steps.
Yeah. I feel like it's a trend right now for teachers to be like, okay, as long as they get this much, it's enough. And when you're done with that, you have free time. And the kids are getting into this habit of, all right, if I get it done, I have free time. I can go play video games on my iPad or my computer. But those HAL kids are getting into this habit of not pushing themselves and looking at anything that is tiered or HAL assignments that I give them as extra work. And it's a punishment. It's, well, why should I do that? Nobody else has to do that. As soon as I get done with this, I get free time. Free time is better than having to think and push myself. And that's what I'm kind of struggling with by giving them the HAL assignments, trying to say this should be something different than what you're doing in class, or, it's not supposed to be more, it's supposed to be different. And it's really hard for those kids to understand that when they're being given free time instead of a tiered assignment. So I like what you said about being ready, even if you don't have kids that can do it, but having those things tiered so you're ready for it. That's a really good way to put it.
I think also you have a cultural situation in your school that needs to be changed. And it's going to be hard to do that now.
Yeah.
But I would hope work with your teachers because they want out of that cycle too.
Yeah.
So I would just say to them, okay, free time, that's like a bad word. We're not using that word anymore. We're using different words. We're using, come up with something else, like creative time. I don't know. You guys are brilliant. You all know what to do.
Yeah. Creative time or genius hour or choice, even choice time, as long as there's something that shows that you're doing something with those choices, some kind of reflection or something.
Well, we in special ed like to use choice boards. Mm-hmm. And I don't see why you can't take a similar thing and build that for a gifted learner, where you can say, if you do this, then you're going to get to do this and sell it. I mean, what they get to do is fun. I mean, if they get, one of the things I would do when in my history classes, when my students would finish and they could be gifted, even the more typical ones got to do it. They would do museum tours. And I would get them I gave them a list of museums on whatever part of the world we were focused on. And then they would go and I would give them links and they would go and play games related to that. Like they learned how to make a mummy, and then they went to Cairo to the museum and they had to tour certain rooms in the museum, and then they would rate it. And I'd have it if it was Egypt, I'd have like 5 little pyramids at the bottom, and they'd have to tell me why it got a 5 pyramid rating or a 4 pyramid rating. And,
Yep.
and then they would have to explain to others, like share, well, what did I learn from this place? And what could that museum do better with online? Now, once again, I'm with Dr. Hayner, that was 100 years ago. And museum tours have gotten so sophisticated now and so wonderful. But you know, the kids can do that kind of stuff too. They can be the guides and take other people on these tours.
Thank you.
I would like to say one thing is that I think too often that the students think they have to do what is regular in class and then do more. So back to my storytelling, I had a student who was extremely bright, and what I did in math was I had regular assignments, and then I would do 2 or 3 that were for this student alone. He went on to be a Rhodes Scholar and an author and everything else. And we never even had to talk about it because your class knows who is really bright. And then when I would give the test over the unit, it would be the regular materials, so the kids could get A's without doing what the bonus problems were, but Bill only really had to do the bonus problems. They had a choice. And so he never had to do more, but he was challenged. And the rest of the class knew they could get an A without having to try to do, because with him, I went back and went through my college textbooks to keep challenging him. He was that bright. I just kept going and going and going. But it was a smaller school, and I probably had no more than 20 students in that class. And it's pretty easy to do in that situation. But I had people along in my life who did those things, because there's nothing worse than sitting in a class and being bored. I mean, it is horrific. And so I am really grateful to people who, before there were even words like acceleration or whatever, were doing it. And I think I come back to it. I think caring teachers come up with those things on their own.
And I've got to give